Hi, I'm David Rhodes, and welcome to the In the Books podcast. If you've been around the fire service any length of time, you recognize the name Buddy Martinette, especially if you've done anything with technical rescue in the last 30 years. He started at age 15 as a volunteer and then spent 25 years working through the ranks with the Virginia Beach Fire Department, heavily involved in FEMA USAR teams, responding to some very notable incidents, including the Murrah Federal Building bombing in OKC and the Pentagon terrorist attack on 9/11. Buddy was a founding member of Spec Rescue International. He retired as the Wilmington, North Carolina fire chief, served as a county administrator in Hanover County, Virginia, and chief of the Lynchburg, Virginia Fire Department. He's taught at FDIC for years. Although I've not had the opportunity to work with him directly, I have done a lot with many people that he's closely associated with, including a couple of really good people that are no longer with us, and that's Mike Brown and Dean Patrick. And neither of them had anything good to say about Buddy in the time that I knew him. So I'm not really sure why we published his book. Obviously, I'm kidding on that. Those guys loved you dearly. But both of us being retired and missing the firehouse kitchen table, I thought I'd add a little bit of that just to get us started. And I'm sure that in your own way, you'll be able to dish that back at the appropriate time. The name of the book is Creating and Leading High Performance Organizations. I'm excited to have the author on the podcast today, Mr. Buddy Martinette. Welcome.
Chief Rhodes, thank you very much for having me. I'm very much humbled to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
So how's it going post-retirement? What you been up to?
I tried to retire, I guess, like most firefighters, didn't really have a pair of scissors big enough to cut the grass, so to keep me occupied, so to speak. So I decided to open up my own consulting business, and I did PB&T consulting, and we're doing something really unique for the fire service. We're trying to stay niche in the fire service and just do organizational assessments and strategic planning and leadership training for the fire service.
Which ties into the book heavily, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's no accident. You know, I had planned on retiring all along in September of 2023, and it had always been my desire, not necessarily to be a consultant.
So when people write books like these, obviously it's a labor of love because you're not writing a novel or something that's going to be on the New York Times bestseller list, even though there's that chance. But why'd you write it?
Well, it was a little bit of an accident, David. I got to tell a little bit about myself in order to kind of get the point, the gist of this is I'm kind of a thinker, and I like to internalize things and be sort of like a painter that starts off on making or doodling something, and then they doodle here and they doodle there and they doodle here, and pretty soon you look at it and you go like, oh my God, there's a painting. And I started writing, and I journal with myself in order to keep my thoughts in line and make sure that I understand the why about how I feel some way. And then at the end of the day, it ends up being something that you can link together and create a painting with. And that's kind of what I did. So it was not on, I didn't start off sitting down to just go like, I'm going to write a book on this.
Right.
Turned out to be a bunch of life experiences that I could string together and hopefully they'll benefit somebody.
Yeah. And that's what I noticed with a lot of the subtitles in the chapters. They were almost like I was going to ask you about journaling or if you kept notes, because it looks like a lifetime of note taking that happened in the moment, if you will. And I know I've done that a little bit, not super disciplined to be able to have a great body of those. But what is really interesting is when you go back and read those, you don't realize how much you forget about what you experienced. And if you put those details in, it starts to trigger some memories, and then you can sort of finish out the thought. So some very catchy subtitles that are very descriptive in what you're talking about. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
I think what's really amazing about that, to add to your point, is the fact that when you write something and you have experiences that cause you to have thoughts about how those things have changed,
right,
and how you perceived something to be one way, you look at it in a completely different way now. And so that was the aha moment for me when I was writing all this down. I would go like, well, I understand what I was trying to say here, but if I'd have said that this way back then, it would not have had this, it wouldn't have resonated the same way as it does with today's experiences.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite sayings from one of my best friends. He'll be explaining something, everybody's just looking at him, and he goes, "Damn it, I know what I'm talking about."
Yeah,
but nobody else does. So who's this book for?
I really tried hard to make sure that the stories and the applications that are presented in the book could be applicable to every level of the fire service. So if you're a firefighter and you want to know, okay, what makes up a great firefighter, or what does a great firefighter need to do to build up to where he can be a chief officer or be a leader in the organization, then these are the kinds of things that you would want to string together to do, whether or not it's understanding what your personal values are, or traits that are associated with great leadership, or just understanding the organizational aspects of leadership and how high performance is built into those. So I wanted to make it applicable to every level. That's kind of like the front of the book, or the whole cover of the book kind of shows probationary firefighter right up to chief, and I wanted the stories to appeal to people like that, and I wanted it to be applicable to every level. And hopefully we hit the mark. And not everybody's going to like every aspect of it the same, obviously, but you kind of want to have something more than just a technical book on leadership. And I didn't want it to be that. I didn't want it to just be bullets.
Right. There's plenty of those out there.
Yeah.
I think leadership's probably the number one subject written about. It's also the number one class proposals for FDIC, but it's important. I mean, that's why it's out there. So
yeah.
So you start off in part one, which is called The High Performance Way. It's somewhat, I would say, anecdotal by telling the reader about how you grew up, and you get into some very personal stuff about your family and yourself. Why did you feel the need to do that?
Well, if I looked back on my career and I thought, okay, where was I successful as a leader? It is always because it was some sort of relationship-based experience. And so every chief officer that's listening to this can relate back and go like, oh, that was a great leadership opportunity there, but it happened because I had a relationship with that person, personal or professional, but it was a connection that you had with that other person. And I think that's true in organizational relationships. If you're the fire chief of an organization, if you want to be effective as a leader, you're going to have to engage that organization in a relationship with you. And so with that as a backdrop, understanding that I wanted people to know who I was. I very intentively started off the book with developing a relationship with the reader. And, some of that's throwing your stuff out there, and you go like, hey, this is who I am. And, with all my misgivings and all the things that have happened in my life, they've added up to this. But I kind of wanted them to know me.
Right.
And some people will read it and go like, this is a bit of a memoir. And I go like, well, yeah, the first part is, I'm going to have to apologize for that. This is about me, because a lot of the things that I talk about in the book relate back to, oh, I see why Buddy says that now. I can understand how he got to this place in his life where he believes this, or he thinks this is the right way to do things. So from that perspective, I guess for those people that are going to be critical, I just go like, hey, it is what it is, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I think it ties right into your lessons, and we'll get into it when we get back further in the book. But obviously one of the key components of leadership is trust.
Yeah.
One of the best ways to build trust is to expose your own vulnerability.
And show humility and your own vulnerabilities.
When you rock that, I guess you were probably, I don't know, maybe 16, 17 years old in the picture. And it says the author as a wayward teenager.
Yeah.
Rocking that 60s, 70s rock and roll hair.
Oh, yeah.
I could still see you there. Of course, no glasses and way more hair. And
right. Yeah.
But one of the parts in that, and I just want to read from this and then get your take on how this came about, was how community service changed me. It says, without any clear direction or social safety net, I repeatedly got into trouble, waited for the next bad thing to happen, spending my fair share of time in the office of the assistant principal, Mr. Shackelford, at Princess Anne High School in Virginia Beach, Virginia. What could have caused a wayward young man like me to turn his life around? Did he witness a fiery car crash and pull somebody from the flaming wreckage? Was it a nearby building fire where he kicked the door in and saved many workers inside? I bet he noticed a fellow student choking and jumped up to the rescue. Nope, it was much more dramatic than that. On that day, in front of the majestic brick school, I unceremoniously tossed an ice cream wrapper onto the ground and started walking back to school. And I truly believe it was a higher power that changed my life with a teachable moment. Mr. Shackelford's response that day would change everything about my life. He told me that I would be required to do something called community service. What the heck is community service and how am I qualified to do it? I wondered. You're kidding, right? Just suspend me and let's both get on with our lives.
Yeah.
I quipped, Mr. Shackelford, you could pick up trash or feed the homeless if you want, but before you can participate in any more sports at this school, you will complete 8 hours of community service. I thought this punishment was the most unfair of all for a simple littering violation. So that was the big moment, huh?
You know what? I think if you can point back to times in your life where somebody guided you in the right place, that would have certainly been one of them. But I've got, so many stories that I could tell about how that fire station that day changed my life, and kind of not even really understanding what is going on in your life when you're experiencing it when you're that young, but you find that, now you're participating in something that's not about yourself. It's not about what you're going to do today. It's about being at that fire station, and it's about being with those men and women that became mentors in my life and helped me get myself straightened out. So in the book, what was the main leadership quality of Mr. Shackelford that you look back on? I played softball with him later in my adult life as well, so we maintained a friendship. And as a matter of fact, my wife and I saw him not long ago and at a social function. He was a prototypical, he was an ops chief. If you know what an assistant principal is in high school, he was an ops chief, right? And so he's the one that kept everything straight. He was a disciplinarian. But I think, from a leadership perspective, I think his greatest quality was perhaps seeing things in people that they didn't see in themselves, or recognizing abilities that weren't being used, and maybe trying to get those people going in the right direction. And of course, that's what discipline really is all about, right? It's what's appropriate for that particular person to get them going.
Right.
He knew damn well if he suspended me again, I would probably just go surfing. So,
right. You wouldn't get anything out of it. Yeah. And that's the art part of leadership and discipline, is like knowing what makes people tick and knowing what to take away from them, whether it's your kids or whatever. Sometimes sitting in the corner does nothing. Taking a cell phone away is like way more powerful than any time out or stay at home, because it's situational. very
Yeah.
situational. And I look at him as, some of the people that I look at as leadership mentors is they held you accountable, but they did it in a way that made you respect them even more and not get mad at them.
Yeah.
There's a
No,
difference between
absolutely.
punishment and discipline.
Yeah.
And
I
some
agree
people
with
are
you.
out just to punish, I'm going to get him or what have you. But that was a great story.
Well, just to tie into that conversation just a little bit, what I think one of the most difficult things for firefighters, firefighters are pretty black and white at the end of the day, and especially when it comes to something like fairness, they go like, well, what's fairness? Well, fairness is like sometimes what you need to do to turn the situation around for a particular individual. So something that would be something that might be discipline appropriate for one person might not be discipline as appropriate for another person, because that's not what would turn that person around, right?
Yeah.
Or get that person to recognize that they need to go in a different direction. But teaching those kind of leadership qualities in organizations is really, really hard. And it's culture. And it's to build a culture around trust,
Right.
where the firefighters trust you as the chief that you're doing the right thing. And then you trust at the end of the day when you're home, sitting in your chair, that they're doing the right thing out there in business.
Right. Yep. I definitely agree with that 100%. So part 2 gets us into personal leadership, getting the ingredients right. You talk a lot about personal values, specifically honesty, integrity, trust, and compassion as being the foundation. So elaborate on that a little.
Well, I think that values, when it comes right down to it, are guiding principles in people's lives. And I think smart leaders figure out what those are very early on. We talked just a second ago, really about black and white. Things are always easy when they're black and white. When they're not black and white, then you've got to have something to filter your decision, so it becomes like decision-making criteria. And so I always talk to leaders and say, look, one of the first things you need to do is figure out what your personal values are. When you have to make a difficult decision outside of policy in your organization, what do you use?
Right.
Well, you want to encourage people, you want to encourage organizations to have organizational values to do that, so that everybody's using the same criteria. But at the end of the day, we all as individuals live our own life by a certain set of guidelines and rules, and those become personal values, and they really do mean something. I will never, ever forget my first chief, Harry Dizell. When I went to him about advice, when I took my first chief's job, you know what his advice to me was? Don't ever take a job you can't afford to lose or leave. I'm sorry, leave. And I said, what do you mean by that, chief? And he said, at some point in time, someone will ask you to violate your personal values. And that's the time when you've got to be willing to step up and leave, and don't get yourself in a position where you can't do that. And you know what? There was a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah. It's real easy to get on the fire department, get out of recruit school, get that little bit of a raise, go in with 3 or 4 of your buddies, get that apartment, and go out and buy that new car and get yourself like trapped financially, so that you can't do that. And your goal, no matter what you're doing, should always be to try your best to maintain your independence by not doing that. That's probably a class that I know some departments do a good job with it, and bringing some guys in to talk to about retirement, about not buying the new car or the motorcycle right away.
Yeah.
But it's tough when you get trapped and you feel like you have to stay.
I think one of the worst things that we have in our profession is shift work. Quite frankly, it gives them a lot of time off, and they deserve a lot of time off. But what they do with that time off sometimes puts them behind the 8 ball. So you take a firefighter that goes and gets a job as an electrician or whatever, house framer, and then all of a sudden he's making way more money than what his lifestyle would normally allow. And then the next thing you know, they're trapped in that. They can't. So you get lot of really good people that are down in the organization that are completely trapped in this world that they can't get out of. And then you say, well, you should try to be a chief officer. And you know what they say to you? Well, I can't afford it.
Right.
I can't afford.
Right. And then you've got the ones who just look at the bottom dollar and they'll leave a $60,000 fire department job with full benefits and retirement because they can make 110,000 over here, but they didn't realize they had a 48% benefit package. And so they end up with a net loss of about 30 grand
Right.
and come back. So yeah, I think, since we're on the leadership topic, that's something that the fire service could do a lot better job of is providing some of those resources to guys in financial planning and making decisions in that end.
Right. There's only so many chief spots, and the higher you go, the less and less positions there are. So there's a place for everything. But I think for good leaders in organizations, if they look down really hard at the organization and try to identify people that have a skill set that will eventually help the organization move forward, those are the kind of people you want to reach down and touch, giving them stretch goals and stretch responsibilities in the organization, or get them something where they're giving back to the organization to help build that platform that they can springboard on later on to be a chief officer.
Right. Because if you don't, they're going to go somewhere else and get it.
That's exactly right. Yep.
All right, you talk in that section, I thought this was pretty interesting about delegation. It says, when you delegate, do not just delegate to give other people things that you don't want to do. You should only delegate when it's organizationally necessary because you have more strategic or complex issues to address, or the task associated with the delegation are not your role to begin with.
Yeah. Well, I think the big trap, and I always profess that you have operating the system people, which are the frontline firefighters, and then you have improving the system people, which are really your middle management folks, and then you have creating the future people, and those are your chief officers and your chief officer, you as the chief, right? And so if you teach people how to operate in those areas by a certain percentage of time, and what I mean by that is, if you're a firefighter, then you operate the system, but you're operating the system 80% of the time, and that's good. I don't want firefighters that are creating the future 80% of the time, right? That's not helpful to the organization. So flip that completely up on its head and say that what gets a lot of leaders in trouble is they spend their 80% of the time not creating the future, but operating the system. And of course, we all call those micromanagers. Everybody knows what that is. But the way that I try to teach time allocation is to teach people to have a respect for each person's responsibility in the organization, right? So if the chief is supposed to be spending a lot of time creating the future and only a limited amount of time down in the organization, then just because you don't see him every time, you turn around, the old, you're a chief officer, so the old, well, we don't ever see the chief. Well, guess what? It's because the chief's at a meeting with the county executive. It's because he's talking to a council member. It's because he's in a planning meeting. I really profess that time allocation and getting people to understand that goes to your, I know this was a long way to get to your question and had to do with delegation, but a lot of chiefs have a hard time delegating, and that's a leadership function that they have a hard time with. But what happens is, if they can't let go of those things, then they can't do the things that will help them be successful in the future, which is to prepare the organization for where it's going to be. Not necessarily right now. You got good people that can help us right now. They're operating the system. They're putting out fires every day. What the firefighters want to know is where we're going tomorrow. Like what's happening next week and what's happening the week after that. I don't want to talk about the thing that's broken today. I want to talk about the thing that's broke tomorrow. And, that's a big part of what we are supposed to do as leaders.
I'm sure you faced this on your way up through the ranks. I know I certainly did. And still do in some cases today. What advice do you give, like the company officer level, the mid-level manager that really needs to delegate some task, whether it's report writing, whether it's some of the training duties or whatever it is around the station or the battalion, but they don't have the confidence in the folks that they're able to delegate to. And so they just take the mindset, well, it's just going to be easier and quicker for me to do it myself.
Right.
That's a trap, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, you shouldn't try to give something to somebody that they're not good at, because that sets them up for failure. So recognizing what people's strengths are, and everybody has strengths. Everybody's strengths are just different, right?
That's right.
And so when you got promoted to lieutenant or captain or whatever your first line supervisor job was, basically they should have not pinned a lieutenant badge on you. They should have pinned a badge that said mentor and coach, because that's what you're supposed to do. Right. And a part of mentoring and coaching is to teach people how to do your job, prepare them for that next level of leadership. That can only come through delegation. But, if you take somebody that's not really good at report writing and give them, say now you're responsible for report writing without propping them up with the proper help, that's just setting people up for failure. And I think that we can be much better than that in the fire service.
Right. And if you don't have the time to sit down and teach them, then somebody's good at report writing.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Then pair them up, let them go fill in at that station for a little while, or bring that person over. But that's one of the things that I see a lot of people getting trapped in. And it's like, you got to invest that time in the front end to save you monumental time on the back end.
Well, hey, so one of our dirty little secrets in the fire service is we always enjoyed the job that we just got promoted from, right? And so what do you do when you get there? Well, the first thing you do is revert back to doing all those things, because that's what you enjoy doing and that's what you're good at.
That's right.
And so, if you're the chief officer and you promote people, having a discussion with them about, look, I want you to know you were really good as a battalion chief, but guess what? I need a deputy chief now, right? And this is what your responsibilities are now. Because if you don't do that sort of thing, human nature dictates you'll revert right back to doing the things that you were comfortable with.
Yep. So one of the big topics, one of the hot button topics right now in the fire service, obviously, is mental health and suicide prevention, recognition, substance abuse. All of those things seem to have really taken hold and have kind of captured the hot button topic. You got a section in there that I thought was really good too. It's called happiness. And it says, the funny thing is about this word morale is that in my 45 plus years in the fire service, I've never heard the term used with anything other than a negative connotation. Do you find that often as a leader, people default to you or the organization as a source of their unhappiness?
Well, I think if you're going to be the chief and you can't stomach being the tip of the spear, then you're probably in the wrong profession, or you probably promoted up too high, because some people can't take that. One of the things I love about firefighters is and I say this in the book, I say firefighters focus on broke things. You don't ever hear a firefighter at fire station say, Chief, really good job at that thing you fixed yesterday. What you're going to hear is what they perceive to be broken today, right? And that thing that needs to be fixed. Sometimes that can manifest itself into morale is bad. Well, if you're sitting around a kitchen table and all you're thinking about is everything that's bad, guess what? Things are going to be bad. It's the way your brain is going to be wired. A lot of a chief's responsibility is to walk around and help people celebrate the good things that are going on. These are really good things in there. But I try to tell people, look, I'm not responsible for your personal happiness. That's an internal characteristic. That's something internal to you, whether or not you choose to be happy. So a lot of firefighters don't like hearing that, but you know what? I'm just like, what? My job is to run this organization and do the things we need to do to be successful. And I want to try to convince you to come on that trip with me, right?
Right.
But that trip is going to have bumps and valleys, and it's going to rain some, it's going to storm some. Some of that's not going to be happy, It's not going to be happy land.
Right. And obviously there are some toxic environments where people are happy in their personal life and then their work makes them miserable. So that's definitely part of the equation. But there are an awful lot of people out there that are just not happy no matter what they're doing. And sometimes you beat yourself up as an officer over that, when really it's like, you just got to provide the environment. What I hope people do is that they do the best they can to make it a great environment, because that may be the only great environment that person has.
Right.
And maybe that turns them around.
Right.
Yeah.
I love what Alan Brunacini always said. You follow an ugly kid home, you're going to find ugly parents.
Yep. I probably use that one at least once or twice a week.
Yeah, that's right.
The others of his. All right. Part 3, organizational leadership, putting it all together. So you talked about spending some time on the dark side as a county administrator, and I actually it was interesting. I started in a small suburban department, just a one station, about 20 people. Then I moved, consolidated with a county department that was a little bigger but less staffing on the rigs, that kind of thing, and then went to the urban, setting in Atlanta. So I had about 7 years experience when I got to Atlanta, and they would hire a recruit class. They would hire certain numbers early, and they were kind of the grunt workers. Maybe you delivered supplies or you worked in various other areas until they hired the entire, 35, 40 person class. And I got very fortunate in that I was like one of the only ones hired in the initial group of, I think there was 12 of us that had experience in the fire service. And so the fire chief pulled me in, and he took his actual lieutenant aide and assigned him to a project, to date myself a little bit, computerizing the fire department, and had me serve as his aide. And so I was right in the lion's den, if you will, new in Atlanta in the organization. But here I was, the aide to the fire chief, going to meetings with the mayor, making sure the schedule was correct. And he was very good. It was Chief David Chamberlain. He was very good about teaching me what he was doing. Yeah. He wasn't, if there was some disciplinary issue, obviously I wasn't allowed to sit in and hear all the nitty gritty stuff. But if we were going to meet with the mayor, like, he was sort of briefing me on what he was saying and telling me where the documents were. Cause we had to carry the big catalog case, kind of like the football for the president. And we'd be sitting there in the meetings, and he'd be like, give me that study on so-and-so, so-and-so. And I'd like, I knew he could get it, but he made me feel important, and I'm sitting right there in front of this iconic mayor, and so I got a good look behind the curtain, and I kind of compared that to your story on the dark side. And that helped me a lot along the way as I became union president, as I moved up in the ranks as officers. But it also, in a way, I wouldn't say it hurt me, but it caused me some grief, because I kind of could see BS when I was being told it by somebody in the administration. And I might say, well, that's not right. So-and-so, so-and-so. And so I was looked at by some as, well, you're against me. And it wasn't that I was against anybody. It was that I was for the organization and wanted whatever the plan was to succeed.
Right.
But, so tell us a little bit about your experience on the dark side.
Well, I'm fortunate. I don't take very lightly those years that I spent as a county administrator, because I learned a great deal about myself and other aspects of the organization. The the realization that I had that came from my time up there is that when fire chiefs communicate with county administrators, they typically try to do it, or county executives, they typically try to do it in the same form or fashion that they communicate with their own people. Right. And what I realized is those people don't come up in that environment. Okay. It's very unusual. It's not unheard of, but it's very unusual for a fire chief to become a county administrator or a city manager. And quite frankly, that's because we grow up in this relationship-based environment. It's all about caring about people and caring about what we do, and those sorts of things that are ingrained into our souls, right? And so a lot of these people, with no disrespect intended, grow up as finance officers.
Right.
They do finance. They're in a cubicle all. They might talk to somebody next to them, or they're in the planning department and they do zoning, or, it's just a completely different environment than ours. And so one of the really refreshing things I got to do when I was a county administrator with my boss, who was phenomenal county administrator, was to give him a perspective that he didn't see. And so he showed me a perspective that I didn't see, and then I showed him one he didn't see. And, it created good rhythm. We had good organizational rhythm because of that. We didn't agree with each other all the time, but we understood each other a little bit better. And I think it made him a better city manager or a county administrator, and it made me a better fire chief when I got back into the fire service.
Yeah, they definitely also don't quite get our sense of humor, I don't think, all the time either. We're always busting each other's chops, and this term of endearment, if we're on somebody really hard and they look at you like, is he mad at me? It's like, no, man, I actually like you.
But there's so many fire chiefs, definitely not middle management officers, battalion chiefs, and definitely not firefighters, understand about the complexity of a city manager's job, and the balance that they have of trying to manage the political aspects of the organization with the operational aspects of the organization, and trying to meld those two, and trying to turn council policy into fire department practice. Those things are very, very difficult transitions for chief officers to make. And quite frankly, that's, as well as I do, that's one of the things that gets chiefs in trouble the quickest, right? Not understanding that balance between what your boss needs to get done and your responsibilities to the organization.
So I'm sure you had to really think about it hard before taking that position, but that's kind of one of the key ingredients of how you grow and learn, is you challenge yourself. And so that was definitely out of your comfort zone, right?
One of my responsibilities was to manage a part of what an elected sheriff's office was. Well, if you've been anywhere in this world and there's an elected sheriff, they're pretty powerful people. Right. And this particular one was really, really powerful. And so having a chance to work with him, and not necessarily did he work for me, but I was responsible for coordinating a lot of his department's functions in the public safety realm. And sometimes that was very challenging. When somebody can go like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but like, I'm going to do what I want. You go like, well, I respect that, have to.
What type of, just for context, what type of government setup was that? I'm sure it was like a county commission. Were they a strong commission where the chairman was CEO, or was the county administrator really the one who ran everything?
No, the county administrator was a CEO, and the board was an elected body, just like in normal places.
In that section, you got a couple of things that I want to touch on. One is work to the middle of two poles.
Yeah,
I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So if you maybe, I don't want this to devolve into a conversation about our country right now, right? But
right.
If you kind of look at people that have good organizational success, they're the kinds of people that can rectify two sides of a situation and come to some middle ground. Because being a chief officer, a lot of times it's about negotiation, compromise. I realize I can't get everything done that I need to get done, but what can I get done to get a step forward going in the right direction, or to break things down incrementally where they're not too hard on the organization to take all at one time. I think when you recognize that their boss has got a whole different level of responsibilities than they have, right? And sometimes we, because of our position in the organization, And because of being out front in the public, we can get them into a bind pretty quick, right? And having that good relationship with them is really important. But I think also, I have been criticized, I can tell you, in my career, because what people will tell you is when Buddy decides he's going to do something, it's going to happen. Okay. Like, because I've done a lot of thinking, I've done a lot of analyzing, I've done a lot of researching, I've asked a lot of people about how they feel about it. And you know what? I've gathered all that information. And now guess what? Here's what we're getting ready to do. Time to go, right? Time to put some lead downfield, or however you want to, whatever metaphor you want to use. And so it doesn't mean that you didn't care about people or you didn't take what they considered to be in consideration. Sometimes that takes a lot of courage. And other times, sometimes sometimes you make the wrong mistake. You just got to go like, hey, we went the wrong direction. We're going to correct and go the right way.
Right. And that's the whole part about being adaptable. Is it's no different than reading the fireground. I mean, you can have a great plan when you get there and go through the front door and find some new information. You got to adjust.
Yeah.
Constantly adjust.
That's really funny you mention that, because I just started writing. We just talked about how I journal all the time, and I started journaling around this notion of 100%, and how people collect information and then decide to do something, and what is the amount of information that they should need based on the circumstance to be effective. And it's really based on risk, right? If it's a really risky situation, well, you want to do a lot of thinking before you go. If you wait for the perfect shot, you lose the perfect shot. At some point in time, you've got to take what you reasonably think is a good shot and then move forward. And sometimes that's difficult, because when you're the fire chief, you're the one that's got to accept responsibility for whatever comes out.
Right.
On the other hand, your organization can be really, really critical about you not doing something. And I will tell you this, when somebody asks what's the real paradox behind leadership, is firefighters will complain about change and too much change, and there's a lot of change. But if you want to get fired from a job the quickest way, don't make any change.
Yeah.
That's the quickest way to get fired.
It's back to Brunacini, two things we hate: change and the way things are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
All right. And we were talking about the work to the middle of the two poles. We're talking about negotiations and all. And it reminded me something that an attorney told me one time about mediation. He said, if both sides walk away mad, then it was a successful mediation.
Yeah.
Neither one of them got what they want.
I've heard the same way with a bad taste in your mouth. If everybody leaves with a bad taste in your mouth, you're going to probably be okay.
Yeah. All right. Another one in there is, I think it's very important to, especially our young guys that are out there. I talk about it a lot in my leadership stuff, especially like when you get into that lieutenant captain rank, and the memo comes down that says effective immediately, blah, blah, blah. And it's just totally something that you just you can't even grasp how far away from reality this memo is. And you got a section in there, resist the urge to fall on the sword.
Yeah. I
think that's important.
Yeah. I think for firefighters, if when you're standing in an auditorium or something, and you're talking to a group of firefighters, I think what I want, if there's one thing that I say, look, there's one thing I want you to leave here with, is when something happens like that, ask yourself, what do I not know about this situation? Don't necessarily assume that the person that did this was an idiot, right? Because normally they're not. And I can tell you, 99% of every fire chief out there loves his fighters or her firefighters and are trying to do the very best job they can to make it so that they have a great experience and they have a great job. They're not out to screw them. And sometimes that can be the perception. So if you can create a culture around people understanding, let me just stop and say, What don't I understand about this? And you know something, it really does work, because I've had firefighters actually walk in my office and go like, all right, I don't understand. And you're going to have to explain this to me. And at the end of the day, when we finished talking, what I realized is I had not communicated effectively enough in the department for them to understand. And, you know, communications is something we all struggle with. Too much information out there. You know, they don't know what's important. Not enough information out there. You're hiding, you're creating secrets. You know, those are all the buzzwords around it. But in general, you know, if you have an open environment where people can engage in a conversation around why these things occur and what you need to do to set the organization straight and go forward, then you know, that's the best way. But in any case, it's never good to fall on the sword. You ever get yourself in a position where you got to fall on a sword, that's you've come to the place where you can't jump to the other side,
right?
And so you're going to fall in the hole. You know, that's just it.
And you're no good. You're no good if you can't still be in the system and do what you can behind the scenes, even if it's a totally jacked up system and you're 100% right. If you fall on the sword, then you're not there anymore, or you're definitely limited in your sphere of influence, for sure.
Yeah. Well, hey, you know as well as I do, in a fire department, in any organization, actually, you know, if you pull your hand out of a bucket of water and look at the hole that's left, that's what happens when you leave. You're gone. Like you're gone. And so you fall on the sword, you think you've done the right thing. Boy, I sure showed them. Now you're out of a job, and you know, they're looking at the next guy, right?
Yeah. And you're a hero to a handful of folks for about a week.
Yeah. And then
you're a story.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Then we've touched on this a little bit, but we get into the last part, connecting leadership and making it all work. You talk about change and ignoring reality and how quickly you can become irrelevant. One of the sections of View from the Clouds, it reminded me of, I helped start up our state all hazards incident management team. And a lot of people had experience with command basically at their department level, but not in a big type 3 or higher way. And so the way this thing kicked off is everybody went to all the training classes, and you know, you just get inundated with how to do an IAP and the planning P, and you go through all those processes. Once we became functional and started deploying, and down here in Georgia, most of the deployments were tornado hits, a few collapses, some missing persons, that type of things. But what I found right off the bat, and I became the IC of that team, was that the team as a whole, even though they were super motivated, they were all great people, every one of them were good at what they do, because of the way we had trained and because we were new into the deployment, there was more focus on the IAP than there was the actual incident. And so one of the things to combat that, and I think it's just relative to that, you know, 30,000 foot view or whatever, is if that's all you're looking at, you don't really have, you need that view, but you don't really have a concept of reality. It's just, so to combat that, I would send the ops chief. Like we would arrive and I would send the ops chief out with the local battalion chief, the fire guy, whoever was out doing search and rescue or whatever. And they would stay out for a couple of hours riding around, getting the feel, talking to what the problems were. I would go meet with the county administrator, the public works director, all those folks, and I'd get what their take was and what they were doing. I'm trying to narrow down what our scope is going to be, because like as a type 3 team, you can't manage the entire county.
Right.
So then when the ops chief would come back, I would tell him like what the administration's view was. He would give me what was actually happening on the ground. They were rarely ever aligned, but then it gave me some very good intel to go back and say, here's where I think we can help you
Right.
and we'll take on search and rescue and clearing the roads, period. So what's your take on you mentioned in the book, obviously, the view from the clouds, but also cautioned about not getting on the street and taking a look around also.
Yeah. So I think what's really important and what people will realize after they read that chapter is that no chief officer can spend all his time in the kitchen at the fire station, right? You have other responsibilities. And so this whole thing about, like, if you're in a plane and you're looking out the window, all you're going to see is clouds. That's all you see. Well, if you're the chief officer, you're in your office all day, all you can see is the things that are right in your purview, what's right in front of you. But the way to solve that problem is not to not be in the fire station every day. The way to solve that problem is to create communications in your department where that stuff funnels back to you, where firefighters are not afraid to walk in and go like, "Chief, you got a minute?" Or, "Chief, come down for lunch. We want to talk to you." Or, "Let me tell you what's really going on with this." Or, that new policy that you put in place, that I understand why you thought it would work, but it doesn't work. It's not practical. If you don't create that flow coming back to you of that information, then the only way that you can solve that problem is to be in that fire station every day. And you can't do that. You won't be effective at your job.
Right.
So I think around the whole story behind that, when people read it, is that, when I was doing these assessments, I'm in a Black Hawk helicopter flying over this hurricane ravaged area, you really can't see the personal aspects of what is happening in that emergency. It's more about infrastructure. You can surmise that people are struggling, but you can't really see it until you get on the ground. And you know what? That's a valuable lesson for fire chiefs. You can't see the struggle that your firefighters are having unless you can get on the ground with them, or unless you can create a pathway that they can get that information back to you so that you understand the practicality of it.
Right. Yep. And if you don't have, and again, back to communications, if you don't have that strong trust and that strong communication line, then it just never works. I always laughed at a couple little scenarios that popped up all the time, as just something as simple as a broken toilet, a leaking roof. That affects the guys every single day they're in that station.
Absolutely.
The captain fills out repair request after repair request after repair request. Nothing happens. And so it's almost a trick. After a point, it's like, well, I don't need to fill these out anymore. Or maybe even the maintenance shop calls and say, "Hey, we know, stop filling them out." Right. Then the right person happens to work at that station that might have the right number to the right tick, and they make the phone call. And then the captain, who's documented it 400 times, gets in trouble because he didn't document it yesterday.
Right. Yeah. Favorite thing I used to tell my chief officers is, like, you're out there talking about strategic plans and moving this forward and that forward. That guy out there, that girl out there in that fire station that doesn't have a mop to mop their floor, that's their problem. That's their problem today, right? Their job is to mop the floor, and you can't get them mops. You're trying to engage them in a conversation about how to move the organization forward, and they ain't got a mop,
Yep. All right. We get into your final thoughts in the book, and just a couple that really stood out. Build relationships.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole premise of the book and the whole premise of my career has been around building relationships. And I want people to understand that that's the way to effectively have a good home life, have a good work life, have a good friend life, have a good social life, building those relationships with people that interconnect us together as human beings. That's a really powerful lesson for leaders, I think. I always think, one of the most powerful things that ever happened to me was at the Mirror Building. And, we're standing there in front of that Mirror Building, and there's 13 floors that are all collapsed down into about 30 feet. And we're all not knowing what to do with ourselves. And Ray Downey comes over and puts his arm around my shoulder,
Right.
And man, I just thought that the comfort of having that personal relationship with that man at that particular time gave me all the confidence in the world. And I've never forgotten that. I've just never forgotten it.
Well, that ties into the other one that I pulled is make others powerful.
Yeah. So if you're a leader, the one thing I want you to take away from this or anything that you ever do is you are only as powerful as the power that you give away. So, you have got to be comfortable enough in your skin to allow people to work towards the organization's success. It can't be about you. It's got to be about the people. And the more power you give to them to do their jobs, if you empower them to do their jobs and you tell them what they want to get, what we need to get done, they're going to do it every single time. No organization that I ever worked in did I go to bed at night and worry that firefighters were not going to do their jobs. A firefighter is going to do their job, and they're going to do it to the best of their ability every single time, almost without exception.
Yep.
And I think we let them down sometimes as leaders. Now we don't do our job the best we can all the time.
Their potential.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. I always look at the unused potential in some of these organizations of guys that, like, you won't let them be in charge today, but on their off days, they're running a business that makes a couple $100,000 with a fleet of 70 vehicles and and all that. But we can't let them sit up in the front seat today just because the personality issue or whatever.
I could tell you one of my favorite stories of my first chief's job, when they're taking you around and they're showing you everything and, here's here and this there. We get to this one place and it's got a cabinet and it's all locked up. I said, what's behind there? What's locked up? That's all the medical supplies. I said, well, who's got a key? Well, I do. I got a key to get in there. So I said, well, so let me get this straight. That paramedic that you have given the responsibility of people's lives to, they are saving people's lives out there unsupervised, and you won't give them a key to get into the medical cabinet. What's the disconnect there, right? Yeah. But we do crazy stuff like that all the time.
All right, here's another one. I think this one's important. Do not get mad first. Boy, that one's tough, isn't it?
It is. The madder you think you're getting ready to get, the more off you probably are, right? And so if you can force yourself to step back away from it and go like, again, I'll practice what I preach. You tell the firefighters, hey, start to first think about what you don't know. That's what I want you to do anytime this stuff happens. And I think when you are getting ready to get mad about something, you better step back and say to yourself, wait a minute, before I show my ass here, I need to figure out what it is that I don't know about this situation.
Yeah, for sure. And it's human nature to get mad, and you got to look at whether you're critiquing a fire incident or there's a personnel issue, is you got to get to okay, why did you make that decision? Not forget about the decision for a minute and let's figure out what brought you to that, because there might be a legit reason.
Right.
Because you may find out something you can't. We were talking about the empathy. It's like sometimes it's easier to have the empathy down if you've been in the positions, but it's very hard to have the empathy up because you have no context of what it is. So that goes back to your values, and about caring about folks. All right. We've been going at it about an hour. It's time to back the truck back in the station and wrap it up. Many have heard me say, if you don't care about people, then don't get promoted. As firefighters and officers, we're really in the people business. That's kind of one of my taglines. There's a statement in your final thoughts near the end of the book that for me was only validation for the things that I believe and have shared about leadership. But I think it totally pulled back the curtain, showed your vulnerability, set aside the bravado, and answered the question of why leadership is important. without the distraction of the fireground, the corporate tactics, without the distraction of ranks or titles. It simply answers the why that I think so many people in leadership don't get.
Yeah.
And it's this. I'm going to read it right from the book. After I read it, give me your final thoughts. As you move forward in your career, always view humanity from the ground. Value each day as a gift, and in some form or fashion, give this gift to others. Forgive people. Never give up on people, and love people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that too, I think what you just described is a relationship, right? That's what you would do. It's what you would do with your loved ones. And it's what we need to do with our workforce. We are in the luckiest profession. We're the luckiest people to be involved in this profession. We've got people that care about people. They're willing to give their lives up to save people that they don't even know. I mean, what kind of human beings do that? Well, they're ours, right? They're the people that we work with. They're our brothers and our sisters, and they're people that we love. And so how we treat them is very important. And so if you love them, if you forgive them, if you listen to them, you try to understand them, you try to mentor and coach them, communicate with them, give them all the tools that they need to do their job. That's just love, man. That's just love. And then and like Chief Brunacini, I know his name's come up a couple of times, but Chief Brunacini would just go like, just be nice. At the end of the day, just be nice.
Yep, for sure. Well, the book is Creating and Leading High Performance Organizations by Cecil V. Buddy Martinette Jr. Whether you're a firefighter just starting out, a fire chief with 30 years of experience, or anywhere in between, there's some real solid and valuable life and leadership lessons in here that only someone with 40 plus years of experience of making mistakes, adapting, and building successful teams and businesses could offer. Buddy, thank you for writing this, and thank you for spending this hour with us and giving us some insights to your thoughts in the books. You can get a copy of Creating and Leading High Performance Organizations along with the other great fire engineering titles at fireengineeringbooks.com. It's a great cover. It's steps leading up on a path with each of the ranks, starting at firefighter, moving all the way up. I think it really captured the essence of the book. It's going to definitely have a place on my bookshelf, and I hope everybody will enjoy it too. So on behalf of all the great people on our books team, I'm David Rhodes, and this one is In the Books.